yes, you can build whatever type of screen you'd like inside of a SCADA or a HMI. This is showing you a typical example of the traditional type screens that got built many years ago, and we still see lots of them there today. But what we really are looking to do is a best practice design concept in what Wonderware calls situational awareness. Other vendors call it other things. We're not saying that Wonderware are the only people that do this. You can design this inside of any application, but what we are saying is that Wonderware provides you with all those tools that you see on the right-hand side out of the box. So it's a smaller amount of engineering. And they're not static graphics, so they use something called symbol wizards. So when you drop them on the screen, you can choose how they look, the orientation, whether it has alarm limits, things like that. The key point about this slide is that both of those screens are identical. So on the left-hand side, we've got exactly the same information as on the right-hand side. There's an alarm on both. It's very, very easy to see where that alarm lies on the right-hand side, whereas it isn't on the left-hand side in that very busy, colourful screen. And a lot of this design concept has come from the oil and gas industry, but it's starting to replicate through into many an environment because our operators need to be able to react to adverse situations as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that is with the right design concept. So this is something that really starts to be succinct throughout the entire InTouch or system platform application, whatever you're using in terms of the Wonderware product set. So if you look at InTouch 2017 and what was released, so they did some engineering efficiencies, and I've just got a couple of quick screenshots to show you some examples of those. They also improved the runtime and user experience. They've improved things like IT compliances, so they've removed the need for some default passwords and things. They're constantly improving connectivity. By that we mean whenever they release an updated driver in terms of communicating to new PLCs or new devices, we're seeing lots of new devices come on the market. Wonderware update their drivers so that you can connect to them. One of the most recent ones is the web services driver. So that means that you can connect to the web services APIs and things automatically. So you give it a link to connect to, and rather than pulling down a load of code that you have to sift through, it will pull in different attributes. So if it's weather, it'll tell you things like where you can pull a temperature variable out of here, and you can display that inside of your InTouch environment. And there's obviously lots of APIs out there. You can connect to the International Space Station if you really wanted to see exactly where that is around the world. Lots of cool things like that. Weather's obviously a very common one because of how the weather affects people's environments and things. So they're constantly driving to improve those types of things. And update 1 introduced something called an InTouch Web Client, and update 2 has enhanced that further, and I've got a demo to show you later. So in terms of the script editor, they introduced IntelliSense into InTouch in 2017, which means it does things like autocomplete. You get errors if there's an error, like underline. You get line numbers on there. They're just simplifying the process. It's been around in system platform for quite a while. They've replicated it now in InTouch. They also allow you to do a custom screen resolution. So when you are in design time, when you're creating your application, you can just choose a specific size that you want to develop in. So say if your runtime system is 1280 by 1024, but you're developing on a full HD screen, you choose this custom screen resolution, and it will only give you the right window for those sizes, so that you know exactly how it will look in your runtime environment. And you can change that as you develop. So if you went bigger, you'd obviously then have more real estate to play with more. So if you decided to change the size of your monitors at a later date, or if you are going through a migration process and you're upgrading and you're upgrading your screens to a wider aspect screen ratio, then you can do that, and you can get more real estate that way. They've also introduced application templates, so this allows you to create a application from a base application, but add some context around it. So if you've got the same title bars, you've got the same look and feel throughout your entire estate, or if you're an OEM, it's perfect for people like for our OEMs, because you're doing lots of replication. You have the same look and feel and style, and it will replicate through to that runtime environment. So your again, it's smaller amounts of engineering effort. If we then got on to a bit about Update 2, so Update 2 now allows for the AlarmDB Logger Manager for operating system authentication. So in the past, as long as it's been released, the AlarmDB Logger Manager, this is where you're storing your alarms to an alarm database. We obviously have now a slightly different way of storing alarms. If you're running the latest versions and you're running a Historian with System Platform, if you're doing it in that way, then you store directly to a Historian server. But if you're using standalone InTouch, it's still the AlarmDB Logger Manager that logs to a database. You used to have to put in SA username and password, so it's down to SQL authentication level. So it obviously can open up security threats in terms of that. By tying it to an operating system, username and password, it's more secure, so we can do it that way instead. You can now do, in terms of managed apps, so the integrated development environment, you can still develop InTouch inside of there as a standalone application, but if you want to use things like Arcus graphics and things like that, and perhaps you do want to manage it through that integrated development environment, so you want to push out InTouch applications across the network from one central location, you can now access that application without admin privileges. So we'd always say install the software with local admin on that machine, but again, it's they're trying to remove this reliance on this administrative privileges to improve the security of the system. They've also introduced a NAD notification reminder. So NAD is Network Application Development, so it's pushing out applications across your network from a standalone InTouch app, so very similar to the IDE where you manage it all centrally. You can still do that with standalone InTouch, but what they've now done is added a notification reminder. So if you have made a change to your application and you start to close it, it will say, do you want to notify those NAD clients and push this update out to all those runtime clients? You get that option there. They've also made the operating system shutdown, or they've made the system aware of shutdown events in terms of window viewer. And this is really just for a licensing perspective. So the first thing it will ever do now when you close down an InTouch application is release that license. If people have started to use that new activated licensing, particularly in a RDS multi-session environment, you get additional elements as part of your thin client name. So you don't just get a thin client name that takes a license up, you will get a thin client name plus an ID number because of the way that Microsoft RDS works. If it shuts down and it doesn't release a license in time, so if it's closed that session, it will start back up and take a new ID number. So it essentially takes a new license, and you can be then struggling as you go through that. So they've got a hotfix for this at update 1, so that you can make the system aware of shutdown events. Only really causes an issue when you've got RDS multi-session environments. But anyway, they've made that change there to make that more streamlined. And then if we start to get into a bit about mobility and mobility in the workplace, and then move into that InTouch Web. And what we have here is just a few stats. So there was a recently published report by the Economist Intelligence Unit, and they found that 60% of employees believe mobile technology boosts their productivity. In saying that, from all the events and things that we run, and from surveys that are done through our own customer base, it showed that only 20% of companies are actually utilising mobility within the workplace. So it's actually quite a small percentage of you guys that are really utilising this technology. And it might, when we say mobility, it might not just be mobility in terms of mobile devices like iPads and things. We could be talking there about getting things onto big displays. So I'll come on to that a bit more later. But by 2025, we're expecting that over 70% of the workplace will be made up of millennials. So when you look at things like skill gaps that we've talked about in quite a lot of detail in the past, and we start to see our older generations that are starting to retire, there's lots of knowledge and wealth in there, and there's, in terms of skills gap, when you look at things like HMI design, when I come back to that first slide that I first showed, and you look at something on the left-hand side, there's obviously a lot of knowledge from an operator that's required to be able to combat and use that type of screen. But if you employ techniques on the right-hand side with that situational awareness design concept, it makes it a lot easier, so that skills gap is reduced. In the same time, on the basis that a lot of our workplace will contain millennials in the future, it's important that we accommodate the way that they work. And the way that they work is everybody has these touchscreen mobile devices these days, so they want to be able to do that in the workplace. And there's lots of proven benefits, and these include things like increased operator satisfaction, higher levels of agility, so they can respond much quicker. No maintenance or installation required, so the tendency is that all these technologies that are going web-based are all HTML5, so you don't have to install anything at a client level. It's very, very easy to use. And then you can also increase your security, your IT, your web security, because mobile devices, there's lots of levels of authentication you can get on there. They could be, I mean, you could have whitelisting and on the Wi-Fi network. So somebody that come and joins your network, and if they've got the password, if they're not on their whitelisting system that the IT team set up, then it won't allow them access into that network. There's lots of different ways we can do that. You can even do things via geolocation now if you wanted to as well. So we can make it very, very secure. The chances are that when you're doing something mobile, it's in a read-only purpose, which again I'll come on to shortly. So with that, what I will do is go into a demonstration of our InTouch Web Client that is part of these latest releases. So I just jump into a virtual machine that I've got running. And this is the IDE that you can see here. And in the top left, for those that aren't familiar, this is just the integrated development environment. We can still do this in a standalone InTouch application, but for the purposes of this demo, I had like a package file that existed only as part of my IDE, so I had to go into here to show this demo. But essentially, when I click on my InTouch application, it's exactly the same as what you'd expect from a standalone InTouch Anyway, so it shows you the way that you configure and use this environment. So this should be loading now. This is where we can configure things like our orchestra graphics in this environment. This is actually available as a beta at the moment, so I am running beta software. The release is due out next month. I'm not sure an exact date yet. When we have it open, you should see something that's very, very familiar to you. You get the same sort of look and feel that you'd expect from standalone InTouch. I've got a demo application that's running in here. What we're interested in is how we create and set up our InTouch Web Client. So to do that, if we go to our graphic toolbox that we now have inside of our environment, so our InTouch window maker environment now contains an orchestra graphic toolbox so that you can develop and engineer orchestra graphics straight from there rather than having to go into the integrated development environment. And what we need to do is set up like a root directory for our web client. So with this, I would generally set up a new graphic tool set and call it something like InTouch Web. When I have that, I can then choose to either create new orchestra graphics. So it might be the case that actually the graphics that exist as part of my application aren't really relevant for what I want to display in my web client, because all I want to display there is like key KPIs and things like that. So for this purposes, I've not created any new graphics. What I'm going to do is take some nice, neat dashboards from my my current InTouch application and just drag them into that graphic. It doesn't break the link to them in terms of my application. And then from my graphic toolset, I set the web client root folder that you can see there. And what I can also do now as part of the update 2 enhancements is I can set a home symbol. So I can, when I load the InTouch web client view, it will automatically default to my situational awareness overview screen. So that's all I have to do. When I've done that, I can close my InTouch environment and it will check the application back in. And then what I'd do from there is publish this to a application folder. So I'd publish this InTouch application to a certain location on my machine. Now I've already done that on my machine just for the reason that it takes a few minutes, so I didn't want you hanging on the webinar while it goes through that process. And then as normal, what we'd then do is load InTouch Application Manager, and again this should be a very familiar screen to you. So you can see in here we now have a different icon on the end, and this is enabling the web client. So this web client isn't something that needs Internet Information Services running in the background. They've created their own web server, so it's very, very lightweight. It runs on a desktop OS if you want it to, so you don't even have to include a server infrastructure. We're not starting RDS clients in the background that shows the InTouch environment. So then all I have to do is find my InTouch application that I've previously published, add it to the environment, and then I just have to run it, because by running it, it means that it's going to be getting the values from the PLC. It has to be running in the background for my InTouch Web Client to be able to display data. That's all it's for. So I run this in runtime, and then either locally on this system, which is what I'm going to do, is show you the web client, or obviously anywhere on your internal network, you can then use the web browser to access this by going to the machine name and then putting InTouch Web on the end of it. So that's our URL that we show, and then when it loads, it normally takes a few minutes the first time it does it, we get our orchestra graphics on the left-hand side. So these are all the ones that we saw me publishing earlier, and it will display live graphics of my orchestra graphics. And that's all it shows. It doesn't show you windows. The navigation is built into the system in terms of, well, it's all the graphics that you've selected. So if you want them in a certain order, then you change the name of them so that they replicate that. I can obviously click around and change to a different graphic if I want to. We get a breadcrumb at the top that shows me the InTouch application it's coming from, and then the window or the graphic that I've selected there. We can also do things like make it full screen to get as much real estate out of it as possible. I know that you can make a web browser full screen, but if you did that, it wouldn't remove this banner at the top. So that banner then automatically disappears when we choose full screen inside the environment. I could actually still lock that to there so that it still is part of the environment, or keep it the other way around. Just take that back out. I can go back to my home window if I want to. There's also things like notifications. Now these aren't alarms. This doesn't do things like alarms, and there's lots of things that aren't supported in this environment. At the moment, it's literally your orchestra graphic environment, and it isn't just orchestra graphics. There's, it won't support things like .NET controls. It's really about getting these KPIs onto dashboards. You can see the alarms in terms of alarm borders coming up on the screen, but these notifications that you see will tell you things that are problems with the application. So if for some reason InTouch Window Viewer is not running and we can't see data, it'll tell us the reason we can't see data is because that's not running. If there's a license problem, it'll tell me there's a license issue in there. And then obviously the user that's logged in there. And then this little black triangle tells you things that aren't supported in that currently published orchestra graphic. So if there's things and element styles and things that aren't supported, then it won't work. But you can see most of the things here are, and they've included things at this update for things like shading of graphics. They're constantly going to be improving this. So hopefully you can see real benefit to the way that we can now get a very lightweight web browser, unlimited clients if we wanted to, from that environment. Okay. So if we just jump back into the presentation, and if some of you are familiar with InTouch Access Anywhere, I thought it was key to show you the differences between the two. So InTouch Access Anywhere is, yes, it's been our way of getting InTouch applications to a mobile device for quite some time, but that does require a server infrastructure. It does require RDS in the back end, and the reason behind that is because when you go to the web page, it's actually starting an RDS client session in the background, and it's just rendering the session in HTML5 technology from the front end. This is fully functional, so if you require read-write or read-only capabilities, then you need to move to something like InTouch Anywhere. So this will show you your alarms, it will show you all your .NET controls. They all work inside of this environment. So a sample user for something like this might be a mobile operator, somebody that needs to move around the plant but does still need that control of the system. The InTouch Web, as you've just seen, it's only selected graphics that you choose, the orchestra graphics, so the standalone, the old style graphics aren't supported in there. It's read-only capabilities that is only supported with this. So, you know, the sample type of people might be supervisors for that awareness or information, or perhaps information in terms of putting a big screen on the wall and showing key KPIs running live from one of your desktop systems that exist in the plant environment. In terms of licensing and the way that this works, you get one of the InTouch Web Clients included with every InTouch 2017 Update 1 or Update 2 license. So you can run one client from your InTouch runtime client, and then the second option is if you want more than one client running from there, you purchase an unlimited license. So it's either one included with it or unlimited. So you just purchase that unlimited version on top of that. So then, just as a summary, I mean, InTouch has been around for a very long time, so you know, it's certainly a very, very well-established product. So there's lots of reliability in there. You can be safe in the knowledge that it's, you know, it's a 30-year-old product. There's lots of things that have been ironed out as the updates have come through. They constantly make sure you can preserve your engineering investment, so they always make sure there's an upgrade path available. You can always upgrade from an older version up to the very latest if you want to take hold of this new functionality. The connectivity I mentioned very briefly earlier, so yes, they're still expanding that, and it's still supported with InTouch. You can now, through this InTouch Web Client, get access to real-time information anywhere, at any time that you'd like to. And they're constantly trying to enable that efficient HMI design and engineering efficiencies and things that I mentioned earlier. So they're constantly adding more situational awareness graphics to the environment so that you have less engineering to do. And that really helps you to deploy those standards and then keep very, very similar across plant, certainly, but if you want to go site-wide or, you know, even further afield, you keep the same look and feel, and your skills gap gets reduced because you need less training to do on operators and things per plant, per site. But they obviously keep easy use in mind. I think you saw how easy it was to actually get that detail, that InTouch Web Client working. It's a very simple process.